So we'll start recording. There we go. All right, so this is where we've left off with our car in Blender, right? We've kind of built it up pretty far, right? And obviously this is our whole turn project, so some of you guys are, still working on some aspects of this. Obviously we're not done with the car. We're going to texture it, light it. I'm actually going to show you guys for the first time, because we didn't show it on our earlier projects, how to do cool sky backgrounds. Blender actually has a couple of really cool sky backgrounds that allow you to do full daytime lighting, sunset, based on sun position. It's going to be neat. That's obviously going to be towards the end of the project when we're done with the model and we've done the shaders and the texturing and all that stuff, but still building it. And so where we've left off, right, is we've built up to this point, building our edge loops, our forms, really using that same primary technique of extruding and bridging border edges, right? And we're actually going to do some more of that today, because our door on the inside is kind of still looking like it's just a thickened door from the outside. And I want to show you that once we've thickened it, we could still go back in and rebuild. I know one or two of you guys might be rebuilding parts of your vehicles just because you got most of it great, and then there's that one area that got away from you a little bit. So this would be a great little kind of foray into that, right? That's why we do those progress checks, so I can kind of see where stuff pops up and things like that. So we're going to rebuild kind of the inner part of the door today. But I did want to do just a little bit more of our things like Solidfy, right? Because we see that we've separated these parts from the other days, labeled them in Blender, right? Because that's our outliner. Remember, you could always double-click, right, and rename it, right? In this case, I already have a name, so just hit Enter. But we want to thicken these, right? And we know we could thicken it in a couple of different ways, right? We know that there is an actual Solidify modifier, right? We can go to Add Modifier, and there is a Solidify right there. Now, this, remember, is for a whole object, so it would do it for the whole entire car body. But you'll notice that the car body, even though it's one object, remember, objects are kind of a much more of a nebulous idea than you think they are, right? It's an object, but you'll notice if we go to 3 for polygon mode, these polygons are still separate from each other, right? That's where our select linked comes in, right? Linked. And you notice how it only selected these polygons because these are ones directly connected to or linked to each other. So remember, objects can actually have polygons that don't touch, right? And we've talked about this a ton of times in class, even on this project, but other projects as well. There's kind of that natural reinforcement that goes on when we do modeling and building things, right? Because a lot of the same tools and ideas continually are used. So in this case, I might not want to thicken or solidify every part, right? So remember, there is the ability to solidify specific polygons. I tend to prefer that method myself just because I have a little more direct control. I can solidify just these polygons or those. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on different objects. Now remember, 4 is your quick key for object mode, right? 4 is your quick key for object mode. And you can just click on, left click on whatever object in viewport. Remember, it kind of highlights like that orange outline. Remember though, the modes are right here. I know most of you guys are fine with this because you've been with me using Blender the whole term, but I know there's 1 or 2 new students that are, basically we threw them into their first model being a car, and that's always fun. But remember, there's that little menu up here that has your modes, right? And we're not really doing texture painting yet or sculpting on this. A lot of you guys have seen that from the earlier projects. But remember, we have our object mode, which is 4, and edit mode, which is 1. But edit mode's really, the 1 quick key, remember, is vertex. And then if you hit 2, it's edge, 3, face. The buttons are right there. So I just want to remind you guys about that stuff. Always great to kind of have those little reminders. So I'm going to just 4 for object mode. Left click on that one. Of course, the outliner gives you the ability here as well, and you can turn the eyeballs off to control visibility, which we'll do when we get to the door here. But I wanted to thicken this, right? I wanted to thicken it. Now, Blender calls it Solidify. Other packages, like 3D Studio Max, you hear it called Shell. Maya, it's actually the extrude tool. It's hidden in the extrude tool, but it's the same basic tool, right? So if I select that object and I hit 3 for face mode, there's all my faces, right? I can select a face, and I'm just going to use the quick key I've set up, spacebar, for select linked. But remember, that is in the select menu, right? You have your nice little menus up here. Select linked, and I know you guys are tired of hearing this because we've talked about it a bunch of times. Remember, the default quick key for it's right bracket. But remember, if you need to, right-click on that tool, and you can either assign a shortcut if it doesn't have one or change it. So remember, and there's tons of videos that go over all this stuff already, right? We've got a bunch of earlier videos that talk about all these things, and I kind of occasionally remind you so you see it in later videos too. So remember, we have our Solidify tool right here in the face menu, right? Because that's really what you're thickening, what you're solidifying into a thickened object is faces, right? Polygons. Not edges, which are just lines between vertices, but faces. So if you go to the face menu, you will see there is a Solidify there as well. So the Solidify modifier and the Solidify faces tool are basically doing the same thing. It's just that Solidify faces lets you specifically do it to selected faces. So I don't even have to do it to all these faces. You can thicken parts of objects, right? If I wanted to, I could just go in here, and this might actually be a great opportunity just to turn the eyeballs off for these so I can really just see the hood. Remember, you can just left-click drag these eyeballs, and it turns them off. Remember F, frame selection, right? Same thing in Maya. If you ever, whenever you guys use Maya, you'll see F frame selection there as well. But you'll notice I can actually solidify faces just on specific polygons. In this case, I want to do the whole hood, but that is one of the neat things that Blender allows you to do is you can solidify all of the faces. But I wanted to select linked, so they're all selected. In this case, since those are all the polygons, you could have just done select all as well. Yeah. So we're going to go to face, solidify faces. Now remember, you get this little options box down here, right? Right down here, solidify. So you click on that and open it. And this is for all your tools. And I know I've mentioned this plenty of times. And I'm going to keep mentioning it, right? You guys have noticed for all of our projects up to this, the whole year, I keep doing that, right? 3D software is complicated. It takes a while to learn and see all the tools. And so as much reinforcement as you can get is great. So this is our ability to thicken it, right? And I'll rotate this around. Remember, Alt-left mouse button rotates. Alt-middle mouse button moves. I know I've talked about that plenty. And that's been on our quizzes, right? So remember, you can actually type in a number here. You can go up by increments of like a 0.1, a decimal place. But you can also just left-click drag in the center of it to control the full thickness for it, right? So Solidify really is your version of thicken, right? If you see it in other packages, it'll be called that. So software is basically all the same, and it's just usability, workflow. Is it easier to use the software? And just figuring out what the different names are. Now, one of the differences we've talked about and mentioned already on this project, since we're doing solidifying lately, is that if you do use the solidify faces right here, right, it does leave these polygons kind of on the inside there, which we don't want, right? If I turn off the visibility for the subdivision surface modifier briefly, you'll see that it's really these flat polygons trying to meet up, right? Turn that triangle back on. Remember, that kind of shows through the whole cage so you see the normal result. If you did use solidify through the modifier, you wouldn't get that. But then it would have to solidify every polygon, whereas you don't always want that. So remember, you can select the face. And remember, if you just hold down Shift, you can kind of select one at a time. But remember, we do have our range selection, right? Our shortest path selection, right? So if I select the face here, because remember, 3 for face mode, right? Right up here, but 3 is the quick key. I can Shift left click, right? So that I've got these two selected. But remember, there is in the select menu, in the same area, select linked. And you see this does not have a default quick key. Remember, guys, I set my own quick key up. But it selects kind of the range in between there. It finds the shortest path between those two selections. So we delete. Remember, when you hit delete on your keyboard, because that's the key, delete on your keyboards, it brings up the delete options. Now, you can assign quick keys to these different ones, right? So I have like Control D for dissolve edges and Shift D for faces, because the default delete brings up this menu. And that works out great. So remember, you can assign quick keys even for these specific ones, right? It's the same way as normal, right? Right-click, assign shortcut, right? And then I can do Control-Delete, and there it is, right? I did want to delete faces, though, this time, not dissolve edges. So I'm going to pick faces. There we go. Now, you'll notice, though, we're getting this weird overlap here. That's because even though we have clipping on in our mirror modifier over in our properties menu, the clipping doesn't really work there, right? Many of our tools like extrude, loop cut, work fine with the mirror modifier and clipping, but certain things like solidify or our inset tool don't, right? So we do have to make those little adjustments, right? So we go to 2 for edge mode, right? And remember, you could double left click. This is one of our quick key quizzes earlier this week, right? What is the quick key for select edge loop? Double left click, right? So double left click. And that selects that whole edge loop. And if I hit W for move, because W is our quick key for our move tool, right? Remember, you can grab the handle so you're moving your X, Y, Z axes in your Cartesian space, right? But also middle mouse button. And I know I've mentioned that ad nauseum, and I'm going to keep doing it, right? Middle mouse button is your view move, right? So we can just kind of view move this until it kind of gets that clipping perfect. See how it kind of welds those together? The nice thing then is if you deselect and reselect this, now it can't break at all. That's what's great about that clipping. That's why I constantly talk about clipping, because if you forget to turn it on, you're going to get those weird pulls sometimes that you get for your stuff. So there's our hood, or our trunk, actually, sorry. And of course, I could go back over to the outliner over here, and I could just left-click drag, right, to turn all those on and those back on. So really easy. Now, you'll see that this doesn't quite fit there anymore. That's because the subdivisional surface modifier rounds the shape off a bit, which works great for most of what we're doing because of the organic flow we want, right? I'm also going to do my tweak tool over here. Remember, that's Q, and it toggles through those, but I've set some quick keys up, right? So remember, if you hold down left mouse button, set quick keys up for those. If you have more buttons on your mouse than 3, you can actually assign those as well. And remember, your tweak tool is just kind of that great ability to just select and move at the same time, whatever you want. Now, to sharpen the shape up, though, remember, we want a loop cut. We want to add an edge loop. So loop cut's over here, right? Alt-C is the quick key. And then, of course, we can just left-click drag to kind of drag that loop in there. And maybe we don't even want it on the top there. We might even want it along the side here, right? Actually, I think I'll kind of leave that for now. I think once we start to add some extrude border edges there, we can come back and tweak tinker with it, right? But remember, you can easily put in some extra edge loops to sharpen up these forms a little bit if we want to. I think I'll put one in and just leave it in there for now. All right. I'm going to save that really quick. So remember, that's how we thicken that. Now, of course, we have our hood to worry about over here, right? So we'll go 4 for object mode. Left-click on that object. And if I want to see it better, of course, we can, left-click drag on these eyeballs. And of course, you can left-click one at a time, but it's neat that you can just left-click drag and it turns them all off. And here we go. Now, in this case, you'll notice that I might not want this little part here. So I'm going to go to 3 for face. And remember, the same way you select an edge loop is the way you select a face loop. And I know we don't use that as much, so I'm going to take this as a great kind of reteaching opportunity for you guys. Remember, double left-click selects an edge loop, right? But if you're in face mode, 3 for face mode, if you double left-click on kind of an edge that's perpendicular to the face loop you want to select, because it's going this way, but the loop you want to select is that way, if you double-click close to that edge, that's what lets it know which face loop to select. And then, of course, we can hit delete on our keyboard, pick the faces option. There we go. And, of course, select linked, right? Select linked. I just use my quick key space bar. I think that's better than the default quick key. That's the right bracket key is kind of way over on your keyboard. And select linked is something we've obviously seen them use often. So for me, space bar is just a better quick key for that. And of course, we can go to faces, or the face menu, solidify faces. Now, it's actually going to use the default that we had earlier, right? So if I go to the solidify options, it's actually using that default, which I'm actually fine with. But that's kind of one of the neat things about Blender, is it'll kind of remember what you last set up. But of course, we could change that if we want it to be a little thinner. There we go. And of course, we do have that same kind of problem in here, where I have to select that face, and then shift left click on that face. And then, of course, we can do select linked shortest path. And I'd like to show you guys where these are at in the menus, because some of these you might not know the quick keys for yet, or like shortest path does not have a default quick key. That's something I added. So I really want to make sure you know what these tools are called, where they're at as we're going along, and reinforcing those things. So shortest path. And in this case, there's going to be a little bit of extra kind of here as well, because there's this face right there. So let's add that. We'll hit delete faces. There we go. I think that should be pretty good. I'm going to hit Alt-X just to double check. I think we're fine in there, but we'll find out in a minute when we go to fix this up. Remember, Alt-X is your quick key for X-ray, and that's something we don't use as much, right? So I really like to remind you guys about that sometimes. It's great to be able to see through your mesh sometimes when you need to. So it is right here as a button, but there's a quickie for it, Alt-X. Now, we do have to kind of fix this seam down the center, right? So 2 for edge mode, double left click, right? Select that edge loop. And we've done this many times already throughout our projects. W for move. And then, of course, we can middle mouse drag just to kind of fix that up. There we go. And look around, we see that. Yep, it fixed it all nice and neat for us. And there we go. Now we've got the hood. So, of course, I can turn the eyeballs on just by left-click dragging. There we go. And we're slowly starting to thicken stuff. We don't quite have the body thickened yet. We'll kind of build more and more of the interior as we go. It is a car, right? There's a reason why we do it for the whole term. It's not exactly a quick project, but there we go. So that's just reinforcing what we've actually done the last couple of lectures, right, and videos. You go back and watch some of those early videos, and you're going to see me doing the exact same thing. So at this point, just on the car, we've seen it a couple times already. The roof, the door, right? And we've seen it on other projects as well. So all that kind of natural reinforcement that goes into these tools. Being able to thicken an object is always really useful to be able to do, right? Something you're going to use all the time, just like extrude or loop cut, right? Certain tools are called the 80% tools, the tools that you're going to use all the time. There's certain tools which you're just not going to use as much, and so it takes a little bit longer to kind of get used to them, know where they're at. You have to get a little more repetition. They occasionally come up. But there's certain tools like Solidfy or bridge or bevel or loop cut or extrude, which we've already seen a lot this term, actually this whole year, because they're useful for building everything. All right, so now I want to really kind of get in here and kind of rebuild a bit of the inner of the door, right? And that's what we'll kind of finish the next 6-7 minutes or so here. So I'm going to turn the eyeball off for these other parts, right? And remember, you can always select in here as well, right? So if you hit 4 for object mode, and you can always select your objects in the outliner as well. It's pretty easy to visually click on it here. I usually use the outliner just to kind of turn the eyeballs off or on for stuff that I need to. All right. So in this case, we can kind of see I don't really need this vent in here. So we kind of probably want to rebuild a lot of this door to have a different structure than the outside has, right? But the thicken was great. We needed to do that thicken to get most of what we wanted. But this is going to go out to any of you guys that need to rebuild part of your model, right? You might feel like, hey, I've got my door looking really weird, right? There's 1 or 2 projects where I was like, you got to work on that door, right, from the progress checks. So this is going to be a great opportunity to teach you guys how to rework a part of your model. You don't have to rebuild the whole thing, right? Remember, you could delete specific faces and then just start to kind of use all of the techniques and tools you've been using up to this point. So I'm going to go to 3 for face mode, right? And I'm going to start to select these faces. Now, in this case, I want to get rid of this guy first and foremost. So we could actually take advantage of double left clicking, right, to grab that face loop. Remember, in the select menu, there is select more or less, up, down arrow, right? So if I hit up arrow, remember that grows your selection. And I know this is something we've seen a lot. Actually, in this case, I really don't want to do that because I do want that outside part of there. So my bad. I think we'll do this way. I'll double left click there to select that face loop. And then we'll hit up arrow just to grow to there so we still kind of have most of the vent from the outside to see. And then, of course, we can hit delete for faces. And that's just going to create a bigger hole there for us. Now, in this case, though, I'm not sure if I want this same loop flow that I had outside there, right? So I still want a lot of this door, but I kind of feel like a lot of this bit is not what we want. So remember, Q, is your quick key for your selection tool. But also it toggles through your different tools. Right now it's set to tweak, which I by default prefer. But if I hit Q, it goes to marquee select, our rectangle, where we just kind of left click drag. If I hit Q again, it goes to circle. And that's actually what I wanted because this is your drag select, right? This really allows you to just to left click drag your cursor, right? So we just left click drag these faces. And I can hold down shift to add there. Remember, shift is always your kind of add and subtract. So if I get a little too much, control to deselect, right? Or shift and control will do it as well. There we go. Missing that one. There we go. All right. So in this case, control, shift to add, control to subtract. And I'm going to hit delete faces. And now you can see that we've got this whole bigger form kind of deleted there that we could start to use for rebuilding. We might even go further. I feel like maybe even these guys up here. Remember, you could use your shortest path, so I could select those. Shortest path, right? Delete faces. And now this is leaving us with this. And we're honestly probably not going to finish the door today with our lecture. I just want to get some of the parts solidified first. But you'll see that if you have a problem here, like a section of your model, you look at most of your car and it's looking great, but there's like that section where you're like, man, that got away, right? The edge loops are looking weird, the shape's not looking great. Just select those faces, whichever way you want to select them. Circle select works pretty great. You've seen that you have, select more or less. And then you could just delete those and rebuild just that section. That's one of the great things about polygons is they're tremendously robust, tremendously flexible. You get rid of what you don't want, and then you can start to rebuild it. So in this case, one of the ways we could start to rebuild this to have more of the proper door structure and not see this vent on the inside is we can go 2 for edge mode. And I'm going to switch back to my tweak tool, right? So remember, Q will toggle it through, but I've got some quick keys also set up for that stuff. And this will still work as a select tool as well. So even though I could left-click drag to tweak stuff, remember, and I know we've seen this tool a lot as well, we can also just left-click, shift left-click, and then I could go down here and I could shift left-click, right? So that I have 2 edges to 2 edges. Remember, Blender will let you bridge from 2 to 3 or 2 to 4 edges, but it will create triangles. So it's always better to kind of focus primarily on same number to same number. But in this case, they're also different selection areas. So 2 to 2 from different parts of the model. And remember, if you right-click, remember, Blender, when you right-click, it brings up the edge context menu. Now, if you were in faces, it would bring up the face context menu. If you're in vertices, it would bring up that. If you're an object, it would bring up that. And that brings up a lot, most of your tools for your edges or faces, right? So they're usually all here as well, but it's easier sometimes just to right-click and get them than to go to the menu, right? Now, in this case, Bridge is actually a useful and important tool, so I have assigned my own quickie to it. Remember, Bridge is quite accurately named. It is a bridge tool. It creates new geometry between separate areas like a bridge. It is quite accurately named. Now, in this case, you see how it's a little bit kind of pushing through there. I need a little more geometry. So I'm going to do Alt-C for loop cut, right? Remember that tool is right here, though. So you have a lot of your big tools right here as well, right? Loop cut being one of them, extrude. And remember, you can left-click drag to put an edge loop in, and I'm going to put 2 in here. And then I could easily hit W for move. Now, we could, of course, use these handles, but since it's a car and there's a lot of curvature to it, view move is going to work fine. So we use middle mouse button to move that out a little bit. I could double left click to select that edge loop, middle mouse button to bring that out a little bit. And you see how we're starting to rebuild this area to actually be its own shape. And we could build in a different handle here, right? So I could easily grab this edge, Control E for extrude. See, it's right there. Middle mouse button to do view extrude, right? To extrude that out. But remember, it's not enough to just extrude it. This has to start to bend, right? We want this kind of structure to kind of build up through here and kind of create one of those little curved forms that you'll often have for where your handles go. So remember, E for rotate, middle mouse button, because that'll use view rotate instead of these handles. Remember, we use these a lot when we built our room because that's a lot of boxy shapes. But when you're dealing with characters, creatures, cars that have lots of curvature, your view stuff's actually going to be the more useful one, right? And I can do another Control E for extrusion and middle mouse button because that does your view extrude. E for rotate, middle mouse button. Maybe a little bit from that view as well. And you see how it's based on the view. And then, of course, I could shift left click to select these 2 edges. So you can always do 1-to-1. Right-click, bridge edge loops. And once again, we can see how this is starting to kind of pop together to create these interesting forms that we want that follow the contour of the shape we're building. Now, the cool thing about this is that's stuff you've seen before. We know how to delete faces, right? We also have seen a ton of extruding, bridging, and loop cutting on this, right? That's how we get our edge loops in here. That's how we built these panels to follow these shapes and forms, right? It was extruding and bridging. So the great thing about rebuilding this inner door is you know how to do it already, actually. But sometimes you kind of need to be told that you know how to do it, right? You're thinking, oh, how am I going to rebuild this door? Well, just get rid of those polygons there and just go back to the drawing board for that section of the model with the same tools you already know. We've been using Extrude the whole year, haven't we, right? It's super useful. It's one of the most powerful modeling tools ever, right? And it's very, very useful. All right, so it's 9:32, so that'll probably be a great place to stop for today's lecture, right? I'm going to turn the eyeball on for the rest of the stuff just so the full car is visible. And, of course, we'll come back at about 10:02, 10:03, just to kind of do a little bit of review of what we did for today. So I think that'll be, like I said, that'll be a great place to stop. So let me go to stop recording.